Hello, good evening, everyone. May I please request all the students there to come and grab these seats here because it'll be easier for other people who join in later to come there and not walk all the way here. Can you release that space for people to pass? Okay. Hi. Okay. So, welcome everyone to the ninth session of our ongoing series, Architectural Practice in India, a Millennial Archaeology. This is C City, and just to introduce all of you again to what C City is. C City is the public arm of the School of Environment and Architecture, and we organize talks, events, and various kinds of cultural events that inform our practice of architecture through the school, through the wing of C-City. And so far, we have conducted more than 200 lectures and seminars, conferences, exhibitions, all included over the last 10 years of completing the school. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce briefly this series, this ongoing year-long series called Architectural Practice in India, a Millennial Archaeology, where we are actually doing almost a marathon of panel discussions in order to investigate what are the particular shifts in the practice of architecture in India in response to the change in political economy that happens after 1990s, because most architectural history, most history of architecture in India has been written, looking back before 1990 and post independence, but before 1990, which talks largely about architectural identity and the questions of place and critical regionalism. But after 1990, architectural practice in India takes a new turn, a new shift, and we see very distinct kinds of ways in which the practice ramifies, the professional practice ramifies. It be in specialists in environment, in conservation, in urban studies, in interior design, in farmhouses, and so on. And these are the consistent kind of lecture series that we are holding under these, each of these kind of specific ideas or thematics that we have identified since this academic year. And we think of this series almost like an open school for the city, because it gives a chance for not only students but also practitioners to engage with each other and reflect on these particular changes and the way in which you know their practice themselves have molded into certain kinds of directions. So, with that, I also want to thank the Urban Center Mumbai, which is a part supporter of this series. And we are on the ninth session, which looks at contemporary artistic practices and architecture. And for this, I'll give a small kind of background to today's discussion that we are going to have, and then, introduce our speakers and initiate this discussion. So, today's talk is primarily focused on how there has been a more engaged intersection between artistic and architecture practices, and we are looking at how architectural practices dialogue with art and a shift, almost partial thinking post the 2000 primarily. As a cultural practice, during this period, architects have continued to expand the ambit of spatial thinking through purposeful conversations with artistic modes of thinking and making. Over the last 2 decades, architecture and art have increasingly engaged new media and technologies, which kind of result in altered sensoriums. They are contended with ecological precarity and questions of urban life, including identity and difference that has almost increased in today's society. These concerns have reoriented how space is perceived, inhabited, and also contested. And a lot of questions are drawn from, questions that are primarily engaged in artistic practices directly. So, by locating architecture in artistic inquiry, this talk will examine how spatial thinking is reconfigured through experimentation, speculation, and critique rather than solely through problem solving or functional imperatives. Otherwise, architects have primarily been seen only as people who build buildings. But these questions, which concern the social, environmental, and political kind of sphere that we all live in, do not percolate in architectural practice directly. And we are now seeing that more and more architects are participating in large festivals, biennials, or are themselves producing works of art in order to engage with these questions in a more spatial approach. And so, in foregrounding transformations in environmental awareness, urban experience, and mediated perception, this session will highlight how engagement with artistic practices enables architecture to remain critically responsive to contemporary conditions. And this word contemporary will be, central to our discussion today. That how and what do we mean by contemporary, and how this term is shaped by historical shifts in artistic and architectural discourse since the new millennium. So, with that, I'll go on to introducing our speakers who have already been, familiar to you. We have today's discussants will be Rajiv Thakur from ART or Art, Justine Depenning from the Architecture Story in Chennai, and Samira Rathod, who unfortunately has not been able to join us because she's down with fever. So we'll unfortunately not have her voice today in the discussion. Nevertheless, allow me to give a short, background introduction to Rajiv and both Justin, and kind of invite them subsequently. Rajiv Thakur is a visual artist, architect, and educator practicing in Mumbai. He obtained his B.Arch from Syracuse University, New York in 1994, and his MSAD from Columbia University, GSAP, in 1998. And since 2000, he has been actively teaching design and theory at several institutions, including Kamla Raheja Vidyanidhi Institute of Architecture, BSSA. He has also taken modules at C, and also participated in several discussions before at our school. He has also taught at ISDI Parsons in Mumbai, and he has been a guest critic and lecturer at various kinds of institutions within the city and across, other countries also. In 2003, he started his own practice, ART, which takes keen interest in exploring the liminal space created through intersections between multidisciplinary approaches to design. His works have been exhibited at a group show at the Museum Gallery in 2010 alongside works by artists like Zarina Hashmi, Ratna Gupta, and he has also he was also invited as an artist to showcase his installation Home, and as an architect, his urban installations called Happy Medium at the Kochi Biennial 2016-17. His most recent works were exhibited in a group show titled Making and Wonder at Gallery 47A, curated by Kevan Mehta, who was also here in the last session, and Detail Archist 4 in Bangalore in 2025, curated by Bose Krishnamachari. From 2010 to 17, he was also curator for Columbia University GSAP Studio X Mumbai, which was project focused on exploring the future of our city. So you can already see that, since the last 2 decades, his practice has been kind of consciously trying to integrate art and architectural thinking together and find out new platforms for the way in which architectural practice can make a meaningful impact, for the city and expanded field. His current work search for connections between seemingly polarized systems like that of visual abstraction versus real-world practical applications, and explore the perverse fungibility between our perceptions of what defines utopian and dystopian spaces. His fascination with the primitive or Platonic form and applied processes of manipulation produce narratives by which we could reassess how to meaningfully re-engage with the design of our spatial environments. And Justine Depenning is an artist, designer, and co-founder of the Architecture Story, which is, and we also have Deepak Jawar, who is the co-founder of the same firm, with us today. Thank you for joining, Deepak. Working across installations, interiors, exhibition design, and architecture, Justine investigates how space is experienced and performed through the body, influenced by performance thinking that treats environments as scores for behavior. Her work explores how design can operate somewhere between structure and event, something lived, enacted, and continually shaped through presence. Justine holds a master's in interior design from Royal College of Art, a master's in spatial performance and design from the Architectural Association, and a BFA in theatre performance from CalArts. So, with that, I must also add that both Deepak and Justine have also taught at sea. They've taken a module during the COVID period with us. So, we are very happy that now they are able to at least join us in person, even if for a little while. With that, I will, invite Rajiv to present his work first, and subsequently Justine. So welcome both of you, and thank you. Please, Raj.
Hello. Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you for inviting me to speak on my work and also to interact with the students and I think other artists and architects on I think a really important subject that rarely gets picked up in architecture school and architecture practice. Yeah, my practice is called ART, and it started out as architect Rajiv Thakur, so it works out really neatly and all. But eventually, A kind of started to work as artist Rajiv Thakur also, and of course, just it became easy art. Um, so, I mean, I'll be very frank. I wanted to kind of make a story out of the whole presentation because I thought, students also for me, I like stories, and I think students also find it interesting. Um, so this is me when I was 3, and it's like, 1974, and it just happened that I really liked finger painting, and they picked the school that I was in at that time to do a piece and all. And I always keep this in my mind, and my mom was always say to me, she's like, you know what? How did you know at such a young age that you were going to be doing this? Because all my brothers are either doctors or computer engineers or this or that, and I'm the only creative in my whole side of the family. And so she always comes back and tells me, I still have this clipping, I still have this clipping, and how did you know? How did you know? I said, I don't know, but whatever it is, it happened and it happened. Now, if I just fast forward, like maybe 20 years after that, right? And just looking at what I was interested in, I was basically into fine arts. And I think fine arts for me was something at that time when I was 16, 17 years old. What am I going to do in the fine arts? And my parents said, if you want to be a fine artist, you can be a fine artist. But if you want to do something else, think about it now. And so I just picked architecture. I just literally picked it out of the bag saying it's a professional degree and it has something to do with art and design and aesthetics. And I said, you know what, let me just try it. And I kind of went with my portfolio and this and that, and I went and I got into architecture school. Now, in architecture school, all my visual arts stuff dropped out of the, it was all about engineering and working with actual these designs, and I had no idea what was going on. But on the side, I would always take my elective in art. I would always find a way to make a drawing or go for figure drawing or still life. And I just remember having this thing about this kind of hard education of architecture, very hard, very disturbing actually at some times, because it was just so, based on, HVAC, and then there was a structures course, and there was, of course, design was there. But I wanted this I always felt there was a softer side of looking at this. And so I continued with all of this during my schooling. And then eventually when I started to work, and I worked for many years, I worked for like SOM, and I worked for all these big companies and corporates and developers. And I just, I built the buildings and I did the architecture, but I just felt it very, very incomplete, I think. And I think that whole part of a professional practice where you develop this idea of what an architect is, and you kind of move into the space of making and building and then just keep on growing and growing and growing. For a majority of architects, that's actually the kind of process. When I started to work with Studio X in 2010-11, I think the questions of the pedagogy and the questions of research, and then this whole idea Mark Wigley had about the future of cities, really started to make me think about, what kind of research people were doing, how is the school going to get involved in India and do all these things. And I just said to myself, we do all these presentations and we put them up for people, and the only people that come are generally architects. And there would not be anybody else from any other profession that would be interested enough to actually understand and engage what we were doing. So, so then I started to say, well, there might be an artistic way, or might be a visually kind of related way where other groups of people, and art is a fairly consumable and more understandable a kind of discipline in that sense than architecture. It's more accessible, I think. So we started to do some research at Studio X on housing, just generally, and I think each of the Studio X locations was doing it, and I put together all this information on basically Bombay, and we just went around and we collected people's narratives. Where do they live? What kind of housing do they live in? Do they live in towers? Do they live in redevelopment? Do they live in slums? And I kind of proposed this to Sudarshan at that time, and I said, it's an architecture exhibition, but it's going to be made in the context of an artist's biennale. So he liked the idea, and then we went ahead and we produced it. And the idea was that it was about people's homes, but how we collect those homes as an architect kind of visualizing a structure or something like that. So we did this at Aspinwall, and it's made out of about 250 or so boxes. And the whole idea was that in each box, you would be able to assemble an idea of what a home was to a different person. And then they all get kind of put together. And these were all made in a kind of a dovetail joint thing where they can be assembled. So ideally, one could actually come in and fill their own box and then just keep on stacking this up. And I think the planning of the whole exhibition also was to look at it as almost like a building in progress, and especially about, I would say, how we make contemporary buildings, which are basically little slots in large kind of urban fabric. So each of these little boxes, and they're all handmade. Like, I mean, the carpenter, of course, makes the box, and then each of the little installations and all are done by myself. So each one, every day, I would do two or three for about 2 months, and then slowly, we kind of put the whole thing together. So that's what kind of started this idea of how maybe a visual art practice could also merge with this idea of research pedagogy and architecture. And then I just started thinking about this idea of, I think, the architectural object, which is what we all kind of learn in school, that we design these, I mean, not necessarily now, but when we were growing up and when we were in school, I think you would design a house, or you would design a small studio, or you would design a kind of a pavilion. And that was the exercise. So architects kind of became this thing, like the ultimate thing is to just have and design a house or design something that was like this perfect object, maybe perfected over time, over many iterations. And so I just started playing with this idea of the city as a series of objects. And so I had to start at some point. And how do I do that? I just basically created a kind of, I think, like a metaphysical, non-real world in which I just created these characters, and the characters then slowly started to gain identity, right? And they're all manipulations of basic objects, and they're architectural, but they don't have any scale. They're literally scaleless objects. They don't have any feet, inches. There's nothing. It's just an idea that then one can just basically take. And then if I focus in on, say, any one of the objects on that grid, then I can start to use, different kind of mediums or techniques, or I can create a kind of narrative from that. So for example, this is object 14 and 15. They're placed on a grid. They don't necessarily have something to do with each other, but then when they're placed in, maybe, I don't know, I think in the medium and the kind of positioning and composition, it feels like they're having a conversation with each other. So then this became very interesting to me. And I started off with pencil because, like my earlier sketches, I was kind of used to working in pencil. But then over time, I started to kind of experiment with different mediums, different scales, started to use also digital medium, and worked with the different objects to kind of create some type of transgression of the architectural idea into the artistic practice, and vice versa. I think also the fact that art could also be something that could represent or make more easily digestible the architectural thought or the idea. So these, again, are all hand done. They're all handmade. Sometimes they're hand painted. Some of these are digital, the ones on the corners. Those were all quite small, maybe 6 inches, 8 inches. Then I started to get okay, let me see if I can do this at scale. And this is about 8 feet by 8 feet. It's again one of the objects, but these are all again hand painted on plywood board. And the idea here was to immerse you in the object itself, like to create a scale where you actually enter a room and you feel like that object is on scale with you, whether it's something that's habitable or something that you experience. And then also the thought that it wasn't just one object. You could actually take the panels of the painting and then shift them around. So you would have over 1,000 combinations of what the space could actually be like. I mean, this continued on. That might have been in one medium. Then I started to work with paper a lot, paper and collage, and to create kind of depth within, using some of the objects as this is actually one object. But in the architectural education and practice, we use orthographic projection to look. So the same object viewed from 4 different angles become 4 different objects in the one composition, but it's the same actual object. How I treat it with the texture or material or space or depth, that changes based on each individual kind of exercise. And these are all basically, I kind of look at them as, they are artifacts in a way, right? They are kind of exercises and experiments in space making and form. Has to be, let's see, yeah. So this is one process of, for example, putting one of the pieces together. The other interesting thing about these is that it is planned like a building. These are not very gestural acts, you know. The whole idea of making a drawing, then understanding the levels, understanding how to put it together, what comes first, what, you know, there's a certain scheduling that happens in it, which I found very fascinating, that it had to be planned. And it wasn't very random. Of course, at the end, some things would kind of be replaced with others, but more or less it became a kind of a planned object. This was another also project that was done for Audi. And this is interesting because you look at it, it kind of looks like a collage from a distance. But as you start to move in and you actually photograph it, they become kind of spatial, you know, scaled in some kind of understanding. Also, what I find very soothing, I think, and very meditative is the practice of repeating and habitually doing something. So, for example, we don't really draft too much anymore. So all of these lines and everything that are done there are hand drafted with like scoring pens and everything. So everything is done in a process that it doesn't mean I get better at scoring if I make 20 or 30 of these things, but every time I make a line, I kind of add to the general knowledge and learning of making something. So I'm constantly kind of evolving in that process. This is another piece. Again, starts off as one of the cubes or one of the pieces, objects on the grid. And as it goes through its kind of transformation, you know, finally it ends up in this kind of three-dimensional colored visualization of one object that has been fragmented through obviously many frames, but also many perspectives, scales, and in time it actually, you know, has a kind of, I call it Mother Architect because it is like this, you know, it's just like an enigma. It's the scale of it is not a kind of a macrocosm, microcosm. It's kind of everything all in one. And if you keep on looking into it, you can kind of see different scales and different things every time you kind of take a look. The same object, not done through collage and three-dimensionality, but just done through colored pencil. So this is just each of the lines that were in that drawing kind of drafted again on paper and then put together as a collage. So each of the grid points kind of represents a certain perspective of the same object in a certain scale that once they're all put together, they still make the object a kind of complete. But the object doesn't exist at one moment in time or one moment in space. This was one done for detail in early 2025. Again, another object, but this one, what I wanted to do was again, you know, work with the kind of process of how I kind of break down I guess the primal, you know, form, which is the cube in this case, and what kind of procedures are done to that to be able to then unfold it and create different spatialities with it. The same in this is if you, yeah, so now you can see the kind of pieces also can be, 4 frames can be reassembled in multiple ways, and then the object actually changes. This happened totally accidentally through the process of making that. All the pieces that were cut out, I had them on the table and I just saw them like that. And I said, well, what if I put together that as a more gestural notion? So this one is totally unplanned. It's just about kind of putting things together. And then I worked with a silk screener in Kurla, and we would do all these photographs. I would take photographs of Bombay, and then we started to silk screen them as kind of these contextual images. So these became kind of these gestural vignettes, and it's not an architecture per se. You know, it's not. I'm not suggesting this is a building. I'm actually suggesting this is maybe even like a social gathering, or this is a story, or this is a family, or this is a neighborhood. And this is what actually everybody is kind of getting contained into these buildings, right? But these are the actual personalities that exist within those spaces in Bombay. So, when that started to happen, I also thought then these things are not scaleless. They can actually have scale to them. So what if I started to draw them where they're not orthographic or objectified in that way, but they actually have a kind of a perspectival scale, and you feel they're a building, and they can start to generate an idea of, I would say they question a lot about utopian, dystopian space. But I also like the idea of just playing around with material and texture, which I think is very fascinating. Like things that the parameters by which we design buildings are a totally different set of parameters by which you actually try to create a visual architectural image when you have no program, you have no mechanical MEP, you have no site condition, that you just think about, what do I want to feel when I see that architectural thought. So in that type of I think energy, then I started to work with the photograph more in a realistic way, but then try to think about also time, like the idea that you have all these, when you look at an old photograph, you have a memory of what that is. Now, whether that memory is actual memory, or that memory is actually a collection of different memories that are put together to create that idea. That was something that fascinated me. So now the object not only becomes something of a kind of non-scaled plaything, it could actually have a scale with it. It could actually be an object with an environment. It could be placed in, the photographs are particularly done in a kind of a more of a kind of a vintage, kind of aged, effect and style, just to talk about, like, is this part of some utopian, dystopian past? Is it a future? Is it the present? Is it something that I saw on my vacation somewhere, or a trip that I've taken? And it's usually a collage of many different things. So, for example, the top left one, let's see. So this is part of the questioning about kind of bringing the artistic practice as a kind of counterpoint to the architectural practice, something that balances it. This notion of always questioning yourself as an architect. Are you an artist? Are you a filmmaker? Do you design products? So then maybe you're a product designer. Do you, whatever it is, you're a teacher. It can be many things. So, I'm sitting there underneath a tree, and I'm kind of making these objects as if I'm a carpenter, or if I'm a kind of a fabricator. And it's just this kind of I think of it as a very kind of self-reflective type of work. These animals around me, this tree is around me, and yet I'm thinking about making these type of, very contemporary or architectural artifacts. And then the scale totally changes, and you kind of put it in an environment where the actual artifact becomes the scale of a building. The way it's kind of designed, these images, is that they're fragments all around, which then talks about ecology. It talks about how we build and how we also discard. And the idea that they're usually placed in nature is that I think that one of the biggest crises that we actually face is that, the whole ecological balance of how architecture is interacting with our environment is a huge question. I mean, it's literally not even 0.001% of architecture actually look at, that as a sustainable, sustainable practice. So this kind of questions itself through the art. Then I also started to make them three-dimensionally, and I think that was also something that was really fascinating, because I wasn't very technologically oriented, through my practice specifically, but started to work with a CNC guy and 3D printing, and this object specifically was designed very specifically to actually come into different configurations without changing the shape of the object. So one object as an idea that you could actually perpetually create kind of a module of within a space or in the city. So it is one design, doesn't change, but it fits together in multiple ways. And I started to 3D print all these things and mill them, and then also place them together as these kind of urban, fabrications where, you photograph like one and then you start to build, and these things just kind of fit into each other in this very interesting way. So it also talks about like how we build, how much we're building, and how I think something that started off as a simple, like kind of architectural question that transgressed into a kind of visual art space, and again comes into this kind of architectural or urban design question, is really fascinating how something can kind of transfer from one discipline to the other. And there's a small kid also who had a great time playing with these things during the exhibition. And I just photographed him. He was just sitting there looking at them and trying to figure out like what are these. So then from the object itself, we were doing some research at Studio X at that time on the city and stuff. And then I started to get this Google Map data of the different topographies of Bombay. And we picked 5 or 6 locations like Suri, the Fort, Mahim Fort, Gilbert Hill, areas that were these ecologically very interesting artifacts. And so we mapped them through Google Maps by taking their elevation numbers and everything like that. And then that data was transformed into 3-dimensional topographies. And then from that data, I started to take my visual objects, the art objects, and start to place them in there to create this idea of, based on the map and based on the kind of positioning of slums, high-rises around Gilbert Hill, how would my object actually start to replicate that, idea? So we did a little. Oh. So, I mean, there were a few things that I was talking about, and that one was the idea of ecology and the idea of also the encroachment upon the natural, like kind of landscape of Bombay, and how this density is basically destroying everything around it. That was one. But then in this video, the idea of the layers, the idea that this is this kind of constantly fluid system, right? The objects eventually turn back into the environment and ecology. So the idea was to kind of create this loop where it's not all about, maybe a monodirectional, that we are on one path, that there's a way to also kind of think about how ecology comes back into architecture and makes a kind of impact there. And that's not AI. That is like manual Adobe Premiere, and each image, that intern hated me because I sit with every day, and I was like, that's not right. That's not right. But she was able to do it. And the thing is, now if I did try to do something like this, oh my God, it was like 8 minutes, and that was like 3 months. So then I said, okay, now let me use some AI, because I didn't even use ChatGPT until about like 3 weeks ago. And my son was just like, you don't use ChatGPT? And I was like, no, I'm not done that. But then I said, okay, now let me put this in and see, like, if I just change the prompt a little bit, like what happens? Like, what happens when Gilbert Hill is no longer a natural ecology, but it's actually what we actually revere the most, which is a glassy, shiny building, and then everything around it. So you kind of switch the roles of everything through the idea of a visual, kind of play. And sorry, one more. Oh, I think there's one missing, but anyway. And this is a graph I put up because I think it's interesting to think, if you see the red line, this is typically like typical architects kind of work, right? You kind of go through your school years and the stress levels go up and this and that. And as you go up and go up through time, you get more money, you get more projects, your ego builds, all this stuff keeps on growing, growing, growing. And, there was some like bifurcation that happened in my 30s, and that kind of led to this idea of doing different things, not being so concerned with the kind of quantifiable end product of a kind of trajectory where you build a practice that defines what work you do, but you just do work that diversifies the idea of practice. And so my graph is very different, and it's all these lines which go off to the right. And there's some architect that I probably graduated with, which is on that red thing, up there somewhere. But, that's not necessarily a bad thing. And then this is a self-portrait I did in 2009, actually. And that was this kind of stage where I had just done a bunch of buildings, and I was switching into talking to Columbia about Studio X. And I was just thinking, where do I really want to do? What do I want to do with my practice? Like, do I want to actually make buildings? Do I want to make small buildings? Do I want to do art? Do I want to do this and that? And I always was a big fan of Giorgio de Chirico's paintings and work, and talking about the idea of metaphysical. And I mean, this is my version of the metaphysical, but it is so blurred and ambiguous that it's very clearly saying there's actually no direction in which I would actually be placed, whether I would move to the left, right, this, that. And there's actually a small postcard of De Chirico's work also inserted in that, just for, some type of reference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rajiv, for taking us through this journey. I'll now invite Justine to, share her thoughts. So, Justine.
Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this panel. It's a great pleasure to be here at SEA, having engaged with the institution over some time now. And yeah, thank you, Anuj, and thanks for listening and being present. So when I sat down to write this, conceive what I was going to speak about, it was, a matter of like, okay, do I talk about my own journey as a theater artist and how I came to the architecture story, or where does the story begin? And I think for me in this context, the story begins with the architecture story, because I work very closely with my partner Deepak, and in a sense, I don't see myself, it's a collective practice. So it's very hard for me to actually now see myself as an individual in some sense, because it's a living, breathing organism, the work that we create. So I've written a few words I would like to read, and then I will take you through a very short selection of images of our work. The architecture story is a practice that explores the role of body in space. It is rooted in the belief that architecture is not only something that is built, but something that is narrated, experienced, and culturally shaped. From the beginning, we have had a deep interest towards body in space, in movement, in rhythm, in repetition, and in duration. Space is not static. It is activated through behavior. Many of our projects work with very ordinary actions like walking, pausing, touching, gathering, drawing from performance thinking. We treat these as rehearsed behaviors rather than neutral functions. And the spatial design becomes a way of subtly choreographing actions people already know how to perform. Body is not an addition to the work, it is the foundation. It becomes the modality through which design is made meaningful and communicable and critically situated. When thinking about the contemporary, for us, the contemporary is not simply what is current or new, but a particular relationship to one's own time. In other words, the contemporary is not a style, but a condition. And I think this is something that, I'm really excited to discuss once we get into the panel discussion. Perhaps architecture becomes contemporary precisely when it does not merely reproduce the present, but holds open a space for what the present cannot yet fully articulate. And storytelling, in that sense, becomes one way of staying attentive to those conditions. So with that, I would like to highlight a few examples of our work. This intersection and this question is central to everything that we do in our practice, not only as an object or a form, but something that we continually keep coming back to and keep using as a lens with which to see. Here we have these 5 modalities with which to sort of, I guess, step away from a traditional architectural thinking. So not user, not program, but the habitual, everyday, imperfect body. And when Deepak and I started working together, rather than writing a manifesto, we said, let's try to articulate what we want to explore through a performance of sorts. So this entire image or performance drawing, body in space, was conceived, documented, and produced in the space of 72 hours. And that element of duration is always also key in how you see it. And as an extension, so body becomes movement, and again, not circulation and not form, but choreography of space. This is a project that we did during the Chennai Photo Biennale in 2019, and Pushpamala N was the curator. And we worked very closely with her to come up with an installation, that is actually, we call it performing intersections. So the entire design happens at the intersection of these spaces. So the gallery had to accommodate 8 senior artists, like people like Gauri Gill and Ram Rahman, and so they need, you know, their own space and breathing room. But at the same time, how do you create an exhibition space where you draw the audience in from one room to the next? So there's a sort of visual cue where the body moves through it and it leans towards that fluid sense of choreography. And I also show this drawing because this is something we started doing right from the beginning. We call it a mise en scène, and basically it's a combination of a hand drawing as well as drawn on CAD, and also sometimes illustrated as well. But it's a drawing that speaks to, we take this terminology from cinema as the mise en scène, which is the entire visual landscape. So it's not just about sight and context in terms of, you know, the road and things like that, but like, what's the coconut cellar that's been, you know, right outside for 10 years, or certain plants and things that become key in any project. And then rhythm is where I say rehearsed or intentional, because it's actually a tool that we use in a lot of projects where you see that repetition, but it's not, it's not mechanical or in a sense. So here, this is in the Kochi Biennale, the last edition in 2022, where again, it's a photo exhibition where we've done the exhibition design, and it's a warehouse that we've used or inserted. So it's an insertion where there's a warehouse within a warehouse, or you could even say it's an architect of a house that's stretched to accommodate and house different exhibitions, some that needed more intimate space and some which wanted to exist in the wider gallery setting. And pause becomes an important tool which we borrow from theater, because it's very intentional. It's not emptiness, or rather void. It's crafted. And this is an exhibition we did for exhibition design. We did for Sunil Gupta. Sunil is a very senior queer artist who spent a large amount of his life documenting his own friends and a wider queer community. But rather than seeing himself as an outsider, it's really about his embodied life around him that becomes his way of storytelling through images. And this was a very important exhibition because I think it's the first and only retrospective of Sunil's work in India. And his work was attempted to be shown, unfortunately, in Delhi some years ago, I think in the Alliance Française, but it was shut down. So we're very proud of the fact that he was able to have this exhibition in Chennai, and it was such a success and supported by our government. And here, when working with Sunil, the way we work with artists, whether it's Pushpamala or Sunil or other people over the years, it's always in a kind of a workshop setting. So they come into the studio, and there's a lot of collaboration and iteration that takes place. And through that, we go through an intense mode of like producing, making loads of models and drawings, and kind of lots of making happens. And then there's by the end of, say, a week or 2 weeks, there's a very distinctive idea of what comes out. So this is really about the pause and the peel and the reveal of how the space takes you through the images. And finally, I would say duration is key, because we like to use duration as a modality where rather than thinking about architecture in terms of scale, you see short duration, medium duration, long duration. So a building in traditional sense would be a long duration, but this is a short duration because this was done for a music festival, magnetic fields in the middle of the desert, and we conceived the whole thing as a modular structure. It's about 11 meters by 11 meters, and it's installed in 15 hours and deinstalled in 4 hours. And the entire charpai, or the seating weave, is actually woven on site. So it's pretty wild in terms of running against the time, but that's the exciting part. And I think what we love about this is also that it creates a third space. So it's not a venue, it's not, it doesn't have a roof structure, but you're making a place to pause, actually, within the chaos of everything that's happening around the festival. And I think just to kind of pull it all together, what we're really trying to do in our practice is to create something of an expanded field of architecture. So I borrowed this diagram and reinterpreted it. There's a seminal essay by Rosalind Krauss where she talks about the sculpture in the expanded field. So taking from that and how we break open the notion of what architecture could be and try to situate it in somewhere in the center between image, object, function, and event, and form, body, time, and use. So with that, I would like to conclude. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, both Rajiv and Justine, for taking us through your practice. And it's interesting that, I mean, I must highlight that Rajiv ventured into art from an architectural kind of training, and you kind of came from a performing uh, how do you say, a movement, performing movement training into the act of space making, right? And those directions are very interesting to kind of then think about what it does to our thinking of the world and thinking of space. And one clear thing that we see is that uh, in through both of your practices, we see how there are so many different dimensions of practice that open up. One is art making itself, uh, but also operating in the space of curation, in the space of exhibition making, in the space of exhibition design, and so on. And all these spaces, in some sense, kind of have the question of space. And also, through that, I feel there is an important question of building audience and the people whom you bring together through your work to talk about a certain kind of uh, um, uh, you know uh, concern, inquiry, and kind of build that into space. So actually, I want to start by opening up the works that you all showed, because they may end up looking like finished artworks or objects in some sense, but I mean, 2 3 things that that I also want, and the concern, the idea behind this series is to understand that uh, in the last 2 decades, we have seen that the engagement with arts of formally trained architects have increased, and I think that has happened because the traditional view of architecture was not able to hold the way in which architects were wanting to engage with the understanding and reading of space and their urban environment itself. So, and in that, where both of your practices are situated, how did you kind of find your way into this, this kind of idea of practicing architecture itself? Rajiv, I remember, visiting uh, exhibitions at Studio X in Fort, and I thought it was a very refreshing kind of space and initiative which was led by you, and that opened a completely new kind of way of thinking about space, where you could bring, I mean, like you said, that architecture works are typically consumed only by architects, and I think that Studio X created a space where very different kinds of people could come together. So if in both of your practices, if you could reflect and kind of talk about how did this particular direction that your practices have taken come through these engagements particularly, and opening up a new audience and opening up a new dialogue. How does that kind of figure in your practice?
I think there are two things I would approach sort of separately. One would be how did I engage with architecture, and the second is the idea of audience. So I think for me, it was I started out in theater at a very young age. I started doing theater at the age of 8, so it was sort of like I didn't know anything else. It's what I loved. It's what I felt most comfortable doing, and it was a natural journey into theater school, and then actually from there. I became at some point after audition and show after show, it's sort of like what's the meaning of it all, kind of self-reflective moment, and actually went and pursued at CalArts as well another course which was an MA in aesthetics and politics, and that gave me a kind of critical grounding of performance or art history, I would say, which then propel me into thinking about how can I actually make my own work and not be a slave to the script or a slave to somebody else's production. And so I moved over many years into performance art. And then from performance art, I was also parallelly working with a documentary theater company in downtown New York, and would do elements of set design and things like that. So space never left, but I think as a performer, I shifted into making my own, or telling my own story rather than telling someone else's story. And then in 2014, when I moved back to India, at that point, I didn't really feel there was much scope for performance art. So I was tired and I wanted to do something different, and then but making space and creating space in terms of audience was something that I was also engaged with through years of living in LA. I used to live in a warehouse with 5 other artists where we had a gallery in the space. It was an artist-run space. So, and I felt like instead of complaining about there being no sort of scene or no interesting, alternative art space in Chennai, why don't I just do it? So I started running an interdisciplinary, like creative art space in Chennai, and we opened that in 2017. And Deepak was also foundational in that process and very much a part of that. So that, I think that idea of audience and event, which we refer to, kind of never left. It was always a through line. And then we started working together. He has a history in his career of working on theater and has also done a lot of individual research projects on body and space and movement. And so we had this common intersection, and we worked on a couple of competition projects together, and it sort of was like just a really natural evolution to hold on to those pillars of movement, body, and space, and by extension, audience. So that's sort of where it comes from, I guess.
Since you are on it, I just wanted to ask you that what is the meaning of making space through performance, like coming from your discipline? What is the, like, what do you mean as a performance practitioner? What does it mean to make space? Because we know as architects, it is about a container idea of space. What does it mean to make space with the body is what I'm trying to ask.
That's, I guess, the audience becomes witness. So there has to be a witness. Otherwise, if it's just a camera, it's documentation. So once there's a witness, there's an energy that's shared. And I think in between the two bodies and the exchange of that energy is a space.
Rajiv, if you want to respond.
No, I actually find the two presentations very interesting because they seem to come from opposite poles. And I found this nice crossing, somewhere there that's not very clear, but it's a crossing, which I like. And I mean, I think I told part of that story as being an architect or being an artist that's kind of propelled into this education of an architect, being surrounded by people who were 18 years old and they were saying, oh, do you know Frank Lloyd Wright? Do you know Le Corbusier? And they would say like this, oh, I know Le Corbusier. I went to this building, Le Corbusier. I was like, what's the size of a brick? I literally had no idea. And I would just look around and everyone like really scared, like what have I gotten myself into? And but nonetheless, through that pedagogy, you kind of accept, right? You accept, okay, this is something I have to learn. Now, the thing is, I went through all that and I love architecture. I do. I really love architecture. If I didn't love architecture, I would have done something else. But I love architecture. The only thing is that I feel like I don't get to say what I want to say only through the architectural practice. And that's where, 1998, after Columbia, 1994, after Syracuse, I worked with SOM for many years, the guys who did the airport. I mean, the level of which you have to, just suck up and go into this kind of vortex of frankly, it's just chaos. It's just chaos of work that you necessarily don't want to do, some work that you do want to do, and you learn all this stuff. And your curve is crazy. Your curve is intense. But then after doing that, then after working with developer, in 2010, when I had that conversation with and the thing is, very frankly speaking, this art practice, it's not an art practice like I want to be an artist out there in the world. This art practice is for me to sit there and to take a load off my architectural practice. It's actually for me to say, I can't do that there because the parameters of this project are this. It's not going to allow me to do this. I can do it here and I don't have to ask anybody. So I started doing it in that type of mindset. But then, when Vishan Chakrabarti, who was was there at Columbia at the time, and he told me Mark Wigley is setting this thing up, and you should meet him. And I had that talk with Mark, and we were sitting there and having lunch, and he was just like explaining this whole idea of what X is and Studio X, and it's going to be this great space. Everybody, and basically what was going on in the last 15 years, where galleries started to open up, stores started to open up. Let's have a talk. Let's do this. Let's do a pop-up. All this stuff started around that time because everyone realized the silo wasn't that great, right? The silo of an art gallery couldn't just be an art gallery. The silo of a school was not functioning as a school anymore. So how do we make this ubiquitous, ambiguous, yet highly charged space, out of that? And we're having this discussion, is explaining to me, and I looked at him and I was like, I'm a pretty introverted person. So I don't know if I'm the right person to do this, And he was like, I guess, you'll be great. Don't worry. And then it's like, and it's okay. And I said, okay, fine, it's okay. But the thing about Studio X Bombay, which is very different from most all the other Studio X's, and I have to say it's probably cultural, which is very interesting, is that we allowed everybody to come in, all different disciplines to come in. We didn't limit it to architecture. I wasn't interested in setting up like an architectural league of New York in Bombay, where just architects come together and talk about architecture and build architecture. I mean, that's great, but that could be one component of it. But what do you do with, a farmer who can't cultivate their land, and slowly that land is being developed, right? And they need a platform to show that, look, this is what I can do. We allowed them to come into the space, or we allowed somebody else. We allowed performances. We allowed artists to set up installations. I mean, there were many over time that we did, and we did 60 or 70 events a year. 60 or 70 events a year, creating a kind of critical mass of just all kinds of things. And then I realized that I really not interested fully in being an architect. First thing I should be as a human being. And then I should do what I really like to do at the moment, at the time I'm feeling like doing that. And I think that was very critical change. I said, I don't need to have a big architecture practice. I don't need to build buildings. I will, but I don't need to do that. Now, what else is there? And that's where the visual arts started to play a role, because it actually opened me up a lot more to accepting the limitations, but also exploring the multiple possibilities that architecture actually has, which I'm not saying everybody, there are hundreds and hundreds of architects, great architects that do amazing work, but it's a very small percentage of what we get out there is actually good, what we call architecture. Everything else is building or some kind of physical structure. So I think that's where that shift happened. And like I said, it was very reflective, like what you said, it's a self-reflective kind of act, right? The idea of making something was not to immediately put it on Instagram or do all that stuff. Eventually you do that, but it was just to make it and just to put it away. And so all these things just became these kind of artifacts, like I said, artifacts that it's just an idea, and maybe the practice kind of shifts this way a little bit. After I make one, I make another one, it goes this way, it comes around. And I love that idea. I really like that idea that if I have to spend my whole life doing this, then if I just had a catalog of things that I made around me, and you share that, it's enough. Like people make buildings, that is another artifact. I make a drawing, that's an artifact. Somebody does a performance, it's an experience, which becomes a memory, which is in some sense an artifact, right? Right. So, I mean, they're all phases or states of, something. But I think they're very similar, actually.
I actually wanted to pick on, your remark about Columbia Studio X in Mumbai not wanting to be the Architecture League, and and at that moment, I thought, why not? Don't we actually require a space where what you said, that you don't get to say what you want to say in building making, but there is a certain kind of outlook and intellectual kind of questioning that comes out of an architectural community. And I'm also thinking of practices such as, say, Rem Koolhaas, or um, Eisenman, who have a certain kind of reading of their contemporary environment, which they are able to bring through their propositioning in architecture. And I am just kind of thinking that, what are these questions that your respective practices could bring, and therefore also kind of actually work towards creating a space uh, where a certain kind of engagement from architects in the larger kind of process of world making can happen. And in that sense, kind of thinking about artistic practices and architecture, or the dialogue of contemporary artistic practice and architecture. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of understand that where is the space for architects to position their contemporary questions, if not either the gallery space or the building. Like building making, like you said, doesn't allow you to ask or position those questions. So how do we kind of first of all, what are these questions? Can they be again kind of be so insular that they are again taken to the art gallery, and can we be comfortable to just kind of keep them framed, or how do we mobilize them, for example, in the way you work with time in that music festival exercise, or in moments like the exhibition making in Kochi Biennial, or the other stuff that you have done, just kind of trying to think aloud.
I think we're in a crisis, actually. Not to sound pessimistic, especially to a lot of young students. I'm really sorry, but I feel like, so much of what I see around, I don't think is actually responding to the contemporary at all. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that there's this oversaturation. Maybe I'm just getting old, but I think there is a serious oversaturation that's happening. And so when you see these projects that I've shown, I've purposefully not shown any architecture projects, because most of these works are just self-initiated. So why are we talking about the gallery and the capital A architecture when there's a whole world in between that, a whole space in between that? And so it's a challenge, yes, but I think that's the most interesting thing, to go out and to actually I find your own format within that, and imagine where a moment of architecture or design or performance or whatever that creative production is can happen where it's not necessarily happening. So it's not just about, going back to audience, it's not just about doing it, but it's about how you do it, where you do it as well, and how you make new spaces to do it in.
I mean, I think, the word cross-disciplinary it's overused. I mean, I like this idea of, meandering, or this concept of that between the disciplines and between people, there's no distinct, specific boundary. There's actually varying thicknesses. It's like maybe in the creative fields, the thicknesses are slightly less. If you go from a creative field to, say, the medical, the thickness is slightly more. So there's a whole level of space in between that, which is not really, it doesn't have its own format, it doesn't have its own structure. It's like I said, like an architectural league in New York. It's a very formalized structure. It's outside the teaching institution, but it allows a teaching institution to go into it. It has a very formal archive process. It is kind of one institution that will do that, and then another institution will focus on another portion of society or culture. But the problem with, for me, is that the city itself at that time, I said that's not that architects will not come to this, but I think because there are also so many educational institutions, there are places. Actually, we left out the educational institution, which is actually one of the core things that all major architects, anyone who's practicing in India, and the good people and the bad people and whoever it is, still come to the institution. The institutions are actually these gathering places. Studio X was meant to be the kind of, it's not like the direct descendant, like it's not like the son and the daughter. It's like the second stepchild removed on the side, do what you want. I don't care, and let anything happen in that space. And I think that was important to allow that to happen, because otherwise, again, you're formalizing something that wasn't meant to be formalized. It became another outlet where all that stuff in between then doesn't have a space. So, I think that was the thing that made Studio X work, but also probably irritated a lot of people because they wanted this kind of formal, okay, let's do a formal exhibitions on, like what Seb did right now, which is amazing. What Seb did at IFB. Amazing to do. But are you going to keep on doing that, 8-10 times a year with just different people curating them? Maybe if there's space, but maybe there's a performance that happens in between. Then there's someone like Jeffrey Sachs will come and talk about the economy. Saskia Sassen came. It was just a space that changed its avatar so many times. I think the issue with me with making it fully architectural space is that once I started to look at the urban and once I looked at the city, I said architects are not going to be able to solve this. There has to be a collaboration, and I don't think it should be like architect and then this person and then this person and this person. It should be like architect is somewhere in there, and a dancer is somewhere in there, and somewhere else is. It's more like leveled, right?
Yeah, I think what Justine was meaning by in between spaces is that there are so many opportunities for architects to intervene in these interstices of urban living, and in the reading of that as urban practitioners, where do we find one is, what are the kinds of questions that we can pose for us to intervene spatially through our respective kind of understanding of those readings. And in that is like taking your point that the building is not the place where you get to ask that question, and neither should we enclose ourselves into the gallery. How do you then kind of what should be the form in which we mobilize this kind of the question of the, and that's where also the question of culture and contemporary is located, and if like what are the questions about the contemporary that we may ask as architects. And I think in that, how can we be creative practitioners is something that probably I understood from your comment, Justine. So yeah, I'm just kind of thinking, and if we can kind of also workshop together that what could be possible ways then of position. I really like your very sincere kind of admittal that you don't get to say what you want to say in building making, which we all kind of feel in some sense. And in that, then, what are the possible avenues through which we can start speaking, start positioning the question of architecture and the contemporary together?
I just wanted to go back to something that I had said, is that it's not that I don't think that a formal practice is important and a métier is important. Like in the age of total remixing and, every kind of this crazy cross-disciplinary approach, I still value, and I think it is important to value a formal training, whether it's a bodily training, which is something that I had pursued, or an architecture training. I think you need that foundation, and then after that, it's the remixing. And I think that is really what's contemporary right now. Is we were talking about how it's crazy. Like you see it in fashion a lot these days. This remixing, like recently. Pharrell Williams, I mean, he's a musician, and then he's a now head of Louis Vuitton, and then you go and you see the last Louis Vuitton show, and he's invested in prefab housing, and he's got like a fashion show that takes place around like a prefab housing thing, and it's like, what is going on, but this is contemporary. So you need the base, and then you kind of, rather than digging into that and staying static in that, you then have the freedom, I think, to remix, for lack of a better word.
I think that's a good way of putting it. It's that the architecture education, thankfully, it allows that. Because you have to engage with different disciplines, and I mean, they used to call architects the master of all the arts, and that's basically what it does. And there was a reason. There was a reason Michelangelo could make the architecture. He could do the sculpture. He would do the painting. Leonardo. I mean, there are many such examples. It's probably just this. I think it's, again, I have to say it's this just being like this humanness about it. I mean, it comes down to that at the end of the day, because I think, and as I get older, I think it gets even more pronounced. It's just this level of also confidence and happiness in what you can kind of do and what you can accomplish and what you also can say in what you do, right? I mean, if I was doing this 15, 20 years ago, I would not be teetering so much off of the precipice of the architecture profession. I would be back in the core, making sure I have my projects lined up and around me. And now I kind of just, if I just feel like going into that space and seeing it, and it's also just like, I think that is what the contemporary is. I mean, maybe my mind is also fragmented so much by what I see around me, what I hear, what I experience, all of that. That of course also takes a toll. Then allows you to maybe think about things differently. Like, is this really important? Like, it is important, but maybe at one moment it's important, but is it that important that it structures everything else around my life? What if I just put myself in the shoes of someone else? Like, I mean, I like this thing about the performance that the exhibition designs, some of them that you've done and that you showed, the 5 ones. I mean, there was something very interesting about that, because even though that's a static structure, it's built, it's made out of material, it's physical. It's actually the fact that you just threw a bunch of people in there, and then that changes the way the whole interaction of the space works, right? The way people, of course, engage with it, or the way people move around it. So it becomes itself the performance without having that energy is there, right? And that's what architects were always kind of meant to do. You make a space because you want people to use it. It's just that you're doing a similar thing, but you're approaching it from a different angle, which actually changes the outcome in some sense. Like if somebody gave me as a purist architect, design an exhibition for a photography exhibition for this, I'm pretty sure I would not have come up with that, right? I mean, I might have not. Just like the same, if somebody was asked to design a museum from the perspective of someone else, they would come up with something totally different. So the core fields do help us understand the expertise, and that's important. But,
Yeah, before I open it to the audience, I just wanted to kind of comment that I think the question that I asked you in the beginning, that this is where, the idea of space very subconsciously comes out in your practice, because I mean the way in which you make a static project into an event uh, is actually, I'm still like, I can't put my finger on it, but in the project that we see that you showed today, it happens. And if Deepak wants to intervene and elaborate that how does it happen really, you know, of course, she's there to respond. That how does this, what Rajiv very correctly identified as something that seemingly looks static, actually turns into an event in the way you handle it through your practice? Like, how are you doing that?
So I'll start with what we're not good at from architectural training. We always think and draw static objects. That's how we are trained. And her training comes from the extreme opposite side. They don't talk about static things at all. Everything moves, the person moves. And I think you asked her a question like, how does it work? Like, what are the techniques do you deploy? So it's, for example, a part of their training is that they have to just sit and watch somebody's gait, how somebody walks. Every individual has a unique gait. When we do projects, like architecture projects, we kind of abstractize it. We make it an abstract. Like I do a 450 mm bench that's meant to sit. So we don't think about what is that particular aspect that we address. So the last project, the cosmic circle, the seating, it came with a very simple idea. The average time that people would spend sitting, other than you three, for a slightly longer time, is 30 to 45 minutes. After that, it's just physiology that you want to move, you want to change position, you want to get up. So, and then we just thought about, can we extend this, double it, triple it, and can we also enhance it, where it's not one person, two person sitting. That ring is for 30 people. 30 people, that net is made for 30 people at one time. So that these are techniques you understand, movement, repetition is, in all our work. Either it's a slicing technique, cutting technique, repetition is very there. And in theater, they have the two-way door. So in all our projects, there is no front, there's no back, there's always side of. So there's a lot of inherent thinking that goes into it. But like Justine said, that comes with a certain practice. I wouldn't be able to do the same kind of work on my own. And I'm sure she wouldn't be able to perform this kind of work on her own. So that is somewhere that we trade. Yeah, we do argue. I think Isha has seen a little bit of it, but yeah. And another one that I really want to give everyone as a takeaway is that apart from your own individual histories of how you came about doing this, there's something very particular that I would like to share, is this very linear model of a training leads to a certain product is gone. That is gone. And I will tell you the reason why it's gone. Because it has become very specialized. Today you do a house, your parking systems are specialized, your HVAC systems are specialized, your modular kitchens are specialized, your wardrobes are specialized, your beds are specialized, your tiling, toilet, everything has become specialized, which means there are certain vertical companies that work on it. and people would like to specify. I mean, end of the day, the client puts the money. So in that, keeping that as the central part, where you think of starting as an architect, this is my training, and this is the product I'm going to deliver, that is gone. So what we are trying to do is, this is the second edition where we got commissioned. There is a first edition where we did not get commissioned because the festival did not know there can be a seating installation. They did not think about it. And we are interested in music festivals, we are interested in EDM, and we go for festivals. So we went there, oh, how can we, how can we offer something? And there was an artist open call, and we applied. Well, quite simply, it's not one day we thought about how do we do this. No, it doesn't. It's just find your interest, whatever it is, be it a coffee culture, do something in life. So have some sort of, that is contemporary. You have to have some interest and see how your skill could take you there. So this kind of linear model is gone. So that is something that I would like to share.
Thank you. Thank you for pulling that out for everyone in your practice. I want to open it to the audience. If you want to ask anything to Justine, Deepak, Rajiv, or anything about the presentation. Anyone? Yeah, Rohit.
Hello. And Justin, Rajiv, it was a pleasure listening to you talk about your work. And as thinking about your work together, I probably want to move the conversation into a slightly different direction and ask y'all, let me just, for asking the question, place how I read your work as you presented it. Rajiv, in your work, starting with the exhibition that you showed us on homes in Bombay, I was wondering if there is a particular, if there is something that the formal exploration in terms of language is trying to achieve in that in the work that you're doing. Is it estranging the existing city? Is it defamiliarizing the existing city by through an exploration with those forms? And in those formal explorations, you seem to be drawing it from the ways in which architects speak about architectural exploration or conceptual architectural exploration through the idea of layering, cutting, scooping. A range of architects. I mean, I don't even need to kind of go to the naming or the history, but there is post 1960s. There is a methodological exploration that this derives from the critique of functionalism in a certain sense, and which also therein comes from your training, right? But when you kind of get it into Bombay and kind of look at homes, is there something that is what is the politics of this exploration is what I'm trying to get at. And Justin, similarly, and that's where I see a parallel between both of your works, but although it enters through the question of the body, and your opening talk, which was quite evocative on situating the body, I was wondering, beyond pause, movement, rhythm, does the body have something more to offer? In that sense, I was just, if one takes the example of the exhibition, the Sunil Gupta's exhibition, which is the exhibition of a queer body, who's also a body that has been exiled, in the sense that this body is not simply about dynamism in its various forms, but it is also has a particular kind of meaning, in India itself. So is there something that in the formal exploration, is there something, what is the politics of the formal exploration? So that's a similar question that I want to ask both of you through your works. The second question that I want to ask both of you is, and I'll play the devil's advocate over here, not but to expand on your thoughts, not to kind of say that A is not the case as you present. My question is, what is artistic in architectural practices? What should we consider artistic in architectural practices as a fundamental question? Is it because they are exhibited in a gallery? Is it there because they are exhibition spaces? Is there something that is an engagement with the discipline of the arts? And what would that engagement be? For instance, in the question of home, what kinds of conversations would your work have with with visual artists or other artists who may have done similar kinds of works? For instance, if one looks at Sanatan's work in Sri Lanka, is basically remembering home amongst Tamil Sri Lankans who were displaced by the 26-year war, and has done. I mean, I was immediately reminded of your work. You see the form of his exhibition; it evokes a kind of resemblance. So the question that I'm asking you, as a conscious practitioner, what kinds of conversations you're having with other practitioners who may be from the field of architecture, particularly from the visual arts or any other kinds of arts. And similarly for you, Justin, what kinds of conversations would you be having with conversations that are happening in the field of architecture?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of that specific installation, the first question. Yeah. Yeah, no. So home, I think that was a little bit different. That was also put in the context of the Biennale, not as an architecture exhibition that was made and placed in that space, but it was meant to kind of invoke a kind of series of questions on how we make things and how we build. The space and the shape and the size of that installation and piece was made to resemble, there were a lot of references. There were a lot of metaphors and references that went into it. One is the way we see these real estate development towers coming up, which they are just kind of boxes stacked on top of each other. We don't know what's happening in those boxes, right? The boxes are just kind of have open space around them, and everybody comes down once in a while to the open space, but then they go up into those spaces and it's, this is mine, and this is private, and doesn't have anything to do with anything. So one was the form kind of took shape from that. The outside of the form were all the open windows, which kind of had these almost like dioramas, how we would make in play school, and we'd make these dioramas of a scene, right? And this is a scene in a house, like Playtime by Tati or something. You would just see this kind of a glimpse of an idea inside of a container. So that was the other idea. And the inside of that whole, and if you see the inside of that space, it was all solid. It was fully empty. It was just numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to 200 something. So it was also talking about the duality. One is that you understand everything about maybe an event or a narrative or a story. And then the other thing is also we are just also saying that this is just another story. It's just another number. It only has a value of this. So I mean, I think there are multiple layers in the in the work. The bottom of the work, which was actually very interesting to me, which I didn't get to explain, is that it's made on a table, and the bottom of the work were all these storage units. So in the drawers of the storage units were all the little components that made houses. So you can open up the drawers and you can just take out, and the empty slots, people would just pick out stuff and just put it there. I mean, they didn't make anything necessarily, but they would just put something there. So the thing was that it was meant to look, absolutely like unfinished, kind of cheap, kind of quick, in a sense, not a very polished. I mean, I didn't intend it to be a very polished thing. It's made out of plywood, another material that everybody makes everything out of. It's like, make it out of ply. Sink, make it out of ply. It's fine. So, so I think it was just a bunch of ideas that kind of came together that way, for me. The other work is more specifically about, one is it's about form, of course. The other is it's about material, texture, color, all the things that we learn about in architecture school as we teach as values. Okay, how do you make light? How do you make space? How do you make contrast or composition? Of course, that's all part of it. And then as what I was talking about, I think during the presentation, which was interesting, something that starts out in one line of thought, questioning, all of a sudden starts to build, it's like, how to describe it? Each work is not a finite work on its own. It's basically like a menagerie, like a collection of ideas or artifacts or processes. Even it might look finished, it's not finished. Because those little objects that are in the computer, that same file has been with me for 18 years. I mean, it's weird, to think about that same file. It's named the same thing. It's called City 5 master file. And it just keeps on getting, another grid keeps on going, another object goes onto it, another formulation in one side. So when I project the whole thing, it's like 18 years of a collection of ideas, but it's in one small file that just keeps on transferring. So, I mean, I don't think I've answered your question, but I think it's the thing is that, I would say that for me, there's never any one, like, okay, I'm going to make this object and it's going to be like this, it's going to be like this, I'm finishing in 2 days and I'm gone to the next thing. It's just something that eventually, acts as a process. It gets assembled over time as a process. It builds in layers in time and is just a process.
Rajiv, I think what he is asking is it in some way is that in calling it the city, what is the politics? What is it that you want to open up?
Oh, well, I mean, look, the objects that I make, like the later ones that you see, that Object 25 or that Mother Architect, like I talked about, it's not about scale, right? It's not that the object can be, actually, it could be a molecule that is just zoomed in a billion times, and you're seeing that kind of one piece. It could be the scale of a city. It could be the scale of a community. It could be anything, really. So I don't see them in scale. I mean, so when I call it city, it started out as a city of iconic objects. And that's really what the question was about, is that everybody's just making object after object after object after object. In this city, maybe it is more apparent that those objects don't speak to each other. If you go to, if you go to New York, also there are objects, but there's a set of rules which sometimes bind them together. So the city planning says, I'll let you make that building if you do this part. Or if you make this an open space, and if you're building up, we need to make a walkthrough through these two. So there's a way of understanding the insertion of that architecture within the city. Here it's not like that. Here it's just like, I'm making this building, look at what I made. And then 2 years later, look, I made this building. Oh, that was 2 years old. Now I'm making this one. This was more important than the one I made 2 years ago. So I think that was more of a critique about the thing. And it started out that way, that all the objects started out the same way. Okay? They're all cubes. And then they all get manipulated in one way or the other. Maybe they all have the same function, but I didn't give them a function. Okay, so all of the work that I did was critique, actually. But then the fun thing about the critique is also just the methodical way in which you make something.
No, but what is interesting about it is then that point, like that aspect then starts reflecting in your pedagogical approach, in your research approach, and those things. So I think, yeah, then it kind of makes sense.
So, if I have understood the provocation, basically you're asking what beyond those modalities that I've kind of identified, what else could be, in that lens. And I think one key thing which we definitely work with is emotion or feeling, for that matter. And so, with regards in particular to the Sunil Gupta exhibition, and even working with any artist, I think with exhibition design, it's very important to also let the design come from the work, let it come as a response, and try to understand or have a sort of time spent to understand the work and the feeling and the emotion. And then how does that translate into the space? That's through material. So why the jali? Because it's porous, because it has that screen, that ability to peer, and you see through it but you don't. And so that's a very intentional choice of material for that particular exhibition. So it starts from emotion, feeling, and then that translates into material, color, and obviously into space.
Thank you, Justin and Rajiv. My question was for you, Justin. Like, I remember the 2022 Kochi Biennale exhibit that you the installation that you showed, and because the illustration that you showed kind of reminded me that it was the installation, like the installation that you guys designed. Usme there was a there were photographs of sanitation workers, and there was this manhole and there was projection on it, and you take a very simple form of a sloping house and then you cut open it, and then I remember walking here and there and across it. But now that I'm like trying to remember it, I would be struck to think that, okay, in a form like this, it has a work, it has such a strong work which talks about sanitation workers and caste and everything that has come with it and the history of it. And like you said, it's like a warehouse within a warehouse. But I could also imagine other forms of artworks which would be housed within the same installation. So like you said that the work kind of also becomes a response to the installation that houses it in some way. So like perhaps through this installation or through other of your works, if you could just draw a parallel to how does it like how does it actually shape up?
Yeah, I think you're 100% right that the work has to influence, especially with exhibition design, because it's a very like fine line between not to try to dominate or not to try to push your agenda onto. There's already the artist and then usually a curator as well. So and sometimes a cultural institution like the British Council, and that's or the Goethe Institute in the past. So you have all these different sort of layers of people, of thinking, of politics, and then the exhibition design has to sort of create a seamless environment that holds it like a vessel but isn't dominating it. And you get these little moments to play, or rather maybe play sounds not serious enough when sometimes the work is such a of serious nature, but like an opportunity to choreograph, and that's a dance within it, like where to push and where to let it sort of exist. And then I think something that we also do is we work a lot with in some of our other self-initiated projects that have turned into installations. We work with different craft communities where, for example, in Kerala, we worked with the people that make, they call it Arunmula Kannadi. It's a first surface mirror, and it's an ancient process where you actually, create, it takes about 90 days to make a single tiny little mirror. And there's only a few families that are actually remaining doing this. It has geographical indication, so it's like protected by in intellectual property by the government of India to that particular region. But we try to work with these different communities to develop a storytelling, and which leads to an installation. But there's no it's total like blindness when you go in, because you don't want to like impose consciously, you don't want to impose what it should be. There's certain fixed parameters. You want to work with a particular craft and a particular community, but then you go and spend that time, and that evolves into an installation that then we took to the London Design Festival, and also working with Jamakalam weavers in southern Tamil Nadu, in Bhavani, which we then took to Raw Collaborative, which is furniture and product design. So again, these are conversation pieces, I would say, where the outcome is a product of the time spent, and then the design is informed through that. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Paras has something to add.
From Justin's work, like I thought about a thought came in my mind that like every day we perform architecture like through associations, culture, and like these act as scripts, So like every day we create countless spaces individually. And I was wondering, then what can be the medium to talk about all these small pockets of performances that are happening, and what can be the form to uh, like Deepak said, like your first exhibition was not commissioned. So like who how do we reach that audience who can commission such works and allow this new kind of spatial questions?
I think it's the first thing is like framing, right? Like with any artistic process, I think it's maybe Rajiv also you can speak to this. It's about framing, right? So I think the first step I always think about is like storyboarding. So everything is performance, but everything is also not. It's also just daily life. So it's about
Are you asking that what Deepak is asking, or is your question more conceptual or technical?
Yeah, like Rajiv said, na, ki like everything can't be shown through build forms, right? So like then what can be these methods and practices through which we can reach that kind of audience as well, that can make a wider range of people aware and make them commission such projects as well.
But I think that precisely is the artfulness of
the medium is the message, right? It's
yeah,
easy as it
exactly.
sounds. The medium is the message. Like it's got to have like a hacker kind of mentality where it's not fixed. It's like anything is possible. You just have to like do it. And that sounds really basic, but it's actually not. It's really hard to see something in another format. And then once you flip it and you see it and you do it, you're like, oh, it's so easy. Now if you ask me, oh, doing an installation in a music festival is, yeah, it's super. For me, I think about it, it's like, yeah,
I
you just
think
do it.
what you're asking is, I don't think you need to search for someone who will commission that to you. For example, the hawker does that on an everyday basis. He rescripts the pavement for you every day, right? So I think you don't have to wait for that opportunity, but find these softer ways in which you just do subtle reconfigurations in which you have rescripted the city artistically.
So, I mean, if you take it not in the, like in a creative kind of take it from a disciplinary point of view, right? Maybe you take some, like an idea of like how the situationists, I used to always talk about the situationists and, talk about this idea of the derive, right? The derive was this drifting, right? I mean, this drifting is a beautiful thing because what is it? You don't make a conscious decision to go from point A to point B. There's no line and there's no destination. Now, now the conversation gets more interesting because there's all kinds of contradictions. You'd have to talk about, I need to have a core discipline. And that core discipline talks about learning this order, having a certain set of skills, which is very important. Teachers can be friends, but actually they're saying now teachers should not be friends. Teachers should be teachers, right? Because you need to learn this stuff. But then it becomes easier later on because you have all that core stuff. Now I want to jump into something else. I can jump into it. I can jump in and out of something. But when you just have, this general, outlook on things. But the idea of the derive is important in that because you don't decide immediately that you want to do this. And sometimes I feel that's the hardest thing to get done. Is I say, okay, I need to get this job for this much money for this kind of thing. Where do you find that? It's so difficult. You just don't. All the things I cry about every day with my wife is like, oh my God, this guy is doing this. I got 10 of these projects and they're all terrible. And then there'll be another month will be 0 projects. And I'll be sitting there and I'll just be sipping like coffee all day long. And I'll be just looking out the window and I'll be like, don't look for anything. And then I'll be like, okay, I'm going to just go on vacation or something. I'll go away for 3 days. The day I'm going on vacation, there's like 3 people call you and they'll be like, I want this tomorrow. And then you're just like, why? Can't I go on vacation and I'll come back and do it? No. If you want to do it, you do it tomorrow. So I think the idea is that chill a little bit, okay? You know what you want to do. You have something passionate. You find that interest. You explore that. And you know what? Like if you just surround yourself with people, surround yourself with your colleagues, you go out there, you see what's going on, you know that even that random interaction is probably going to eventually lead to something. And I think that's what it all is about. I think actually this generation and the younger generations, it's going to be much easier because even though the face-to-face interaction is not there, the outreach is like billionfold, where I don't, like I told my son, he's like, he's 18. He's like, you don't use ChatGPT? I said, I never use ChatGPT. I got to make a presentation at C in 3 weeks. Let me just see if I do something on this. And he's like, and he saw what I did. He's like this. He's like, do most old people don't use ChatGPT? And I was like, I'm not sure. I don't want to use ChatGPT, but I said I used it for this purpose. So he was like, whatever it is. But they can just, within 2 minutes, their span and reach is like incredible. So I feel the opportunity, even if you throw something out there to 1,000 people, they'll be able to do it much quicker because somebody like me who likes face-to-face interactions, who would rather not message or email. I don't actually like to talk on the phone to anybody. I said, if I meet you face to face, we'll have a discussion. Otherwise, don't call me and have like a half an hour discussion. I won't do it. So you guys have opportunity, but I would say that my personal feeling is like, don't focus on that. Okay. If you like architecture, if you love architecture or you love art or dance or whatever it is, I would just say, just create, through that and see how that kind of configures this wandering around, and you'll find something. I think it happens in serendipity. It happens.
Prasad, we'll end with your question.
Thanks. Thanks, both of you. I mean, it's a question actually, even for Anuj. It seems as if the art or the idea of being an artist has a certain expansiveness that, people who don't find space in architecture to do what they want seem to be, entering the world of art or thinking about their world as artistic practices, while I know it seems like there's some mafia who seems to be controlling what architecture means. In some sense that there's a refusal to not just qualify but count. And I think Anuj has been thinking about it for a while, but also just this range of practices that we've been seeing. The building of the building seems to be really a short part of it. It's to do with setting up an office and all the logistics and, so I was wondering, what is it about architecture that makes it such a narrow field of or narrow discipline that one cannot do what one wants to do, or you can't think of multiple forms of practices, and like writing is writing, and so is there something about architecture that just refuses to allow itself to expand to other kinds of practices?
Actually, it's something to do with the graph that he showed, Yeah, I think there is a certain kind of, it's embedded in the training itself, no, that you are, no, I'm saying that the school trains you to think that that is the goal that one has to,
Right.
means, majority of practice. And it also leaves you handicapped with thinking about other things that you can do. And other things always becomes another specialization. For example, the crisis that Paris is dealing with right now, I mean, he's also looking for the next person who will commission. That is also as real, actually. So, but I mean, to kind of make that wandering into a practice requires artfulness. And that there you have to navigate, like you have to constantly be a kind of chameleon and keep changing your colors to, find a new shade of architecture to exist and be meaningful in that moment, is what I understand. But please, I didn't mean to steal your mic.
I can't answer this question. I think it's part of the process of, because what I do is finding answers to these questions. Is it a disbelief in some sense of the power of what I thought an architect would actually do? I still think in the core idea of architecture that exists, but maybe it has something to do with what Deepak was saying about the specialization, and it's a you seem maybe contemporary wise because of, okay, one thing that I learned in the last several years is that there are two things that control the world. One is politics and one is economics. There's nothing else. Okay, everything else is subservient to those two things, really. even architecture is, even art is. And this is art is you can do it for yourself as an internal kind of self-reflective thing. Like if I make this drawing, or you choreograph an idea, a story, or a narrative, but then to get commissioned or to get this project or to build something within the spectrum, it either has some kind of political connection or some economic, kind of tie, So I'm not exactly sure. Maybe it's also just the kind of technology. Like, I mean, can you seriously? I mean, if I scroll on Instagram or Pinterest, can you tell me how much kind of unique architectural thought or ideas or images that you actually see? It's actually so confusing to me, because there's so many things that are looking the same and the same and the same over and over and regurgitated from one view to the other with one slight change of color. It doesn't seem like there's any idea. It's basically like, I mean, it's just like image making, right? And so I think a lot of it is that we are losing our, one is our core mastery. We say we have to be able to connect to all these different disciplines, because it's about engaging with another discipline, and that core discipline itself is being outsourced to 20 other disciplines, right? And what's most important is that my room is, I have a Persian theme room here, and then I have another theme room here, and I want my outside to look like this thing that I saw there, that I visited last year. So there's a lot of this stuff that goes around that's just, it seems like it's not an architect's job anymore to do. I don't know. It's somebody else's job. It's a stylist, or, a influencer's job or something. I don't know. I mean, I'm just being honest, because if I'm not pushy with the client and I say, look, my intuitive sense is that we need to do this, and they say, well, my competition is doing this, and they've gotten very good response, so why can't you just do something similar? I don't know how to get around that. Do you just do it, or do you say no to them like a traditional, like, Howard character, and say, no, I'm not going to do it?
I think part of the problem is over identification with that discipline that we graduate from. Like, if you make yourself purposeful in a particular situation, you will invariably kind of, access the tools that your education has given to work out that situation. So in that, you don't need to be an architect, but you are implicitly so. Yeah, but this is a longer conversation over.
It's a different conversation, and it's very, it's.
Yeah, unless Justin, you want to kind of put your 2 cents to it. Okay, but thank you for leaving us in that thought, Prasad. And also, I really, am going back with the question that Rohit also put in the room, that, and we should all kind of think about it, that what is artistic in our architectural practice, and in the widest sense. I think that's a very important one for this particular session. So thank you so much, all of you, to stay back and engage with all of us. Thank you. Our next conversation will happen at the end of next month, and we'll keep you posted with that. So please stay tuned. Thank you so much.
Thank you.